Bless you. I'm out in the shed again, and since it's cold and started raining, I put the little heater on just to see how well that goes, and that's working really well. Definitely keeps this area warm. Not sure about heating the rest of the shed, but that's okay. And I'm still working on the passenger door. Yeah, it's interesting. So I've ended up having to make this top rail quite thick. I've been gluing extra pieces of wood on, which eventually are all going to get cut back. But it's the only way I've been able to figure out how to get the actual curvature and the shape I need. There's actually quite a lot of shape in these doors. If you look at them side on, you think they're kind of flat, but if we look at this one, which is an original one, there's quite a bit of curvature in it. You can see, if you sort of line this up, you can see how the top curves in, and there's quite a bit of bow to it. So the way I've been figuring out where the wood needs to go is I have oops, I've just noticed glue everywhere. Probably just glued it to the bench. What I ended up doing was I made the two pieces that I'd glued together the other night. I screwed those in place. There's a screw from the top and a couple of screws in the back. Again, that's not ideal, but once this is skinned, it's going to be nice and strong, I think. I may put some little brackets in here. I'm not sure. But once I had the main piece in place, I was able to actually fit the door into the hole, and using a bendy straight edge, a longer one, which ironically isn't actually straight on one side, so I tend to use it more for things like this than drawing straight lines. But using that up against the body, I can bend it, and you can sort of move it up and down the body and see where the line goes. So you sort of follow the line there, follow the line here, and you get a fair curve. And by doing that with the door sitting in the frame, I was able to see where I needed to add timber to be able to bring it out. So that should work. Now I need to, I'll wait overnight for the glue to dry, and I should be able to start trimming it back. It may be possible to see here. It's a bit tricky to see because of the way I've got it in the vise, but this is actually on a little bit of an angle, so it follows the curve of the car. And what I'm going to need to do is sort of sand all of this down, and you'll be able to see there'll be a line that comes down like this to give me the right curvature. It's going to be interesting to actually get that correct, but as I say, I can do that kind of on the car, so I will fit it to the car, whoops, so it actually follows the opening. The other thing you can notice is that the back of the door isn't actually vertical. There's a curve there because of the curve of the body. This is probably the hardest piece to make, I would say. Once I have done this side, I will start on the other side. I want to make sure I get this completely right first on the passenger side before I make the driver's door, and that should be easier once I have figured out the right way to do it with this one. That's the plan at the moment anyway, but I think that's all I can really do at the moment until the glue dries. The last few evenings I've been coming out after work and sanding down the door and then gluing extra bits on where I needed them, waiting for the glue to dry overnight, and then next day repeating it. And by slowly going through that process, gluing bits on, cutting off what I don't need, These are some of the offcuts. I've managed to get a pretty good door shape. So most of the shape is in that top rail. That's the one that had to be extra thick, so I could cut the appropriate curve in it there for the barrel shape of the body. And that fits pretty well now. I think it's going to be impossible to get it perfect, because also everything's going to move when you skin it, and the wood's probably going to warp and things like that. So I'm just making sure there's enough clearance around everything that it should work pretty well. The way I've got it at the moment, where the skin overhangs the bottom, it will overhang the side of the body at the back and the bottom edge, how it should do. And I got inspired by Kyle's incredibly limp ruler and went out and found my own from Super Cheap. So I have got other steel rules, and normally you want them quite thick so they're not so bendy. But I went out and specifically looked for the flimsiest one I could find and got this. And I've been using this to check the curves by bending it around the body. And this is pretty good now. So that fits in there nicely. I know how to do it now, and I know where most of the shape is. So when I do the other side, hopefully there won't quite be as much waste. You can see I had to cut off quite a bit. And not quite as much mess everywhere. So in order to thin this down, I've been using a combination of the wood plane, the jigsaw to do some of the bigger cuts, and then my belt sander with a 40 grit belt, and then I've got the random orbit sander with 80 grit, I think it is, just to do the final smoothing off. So it's come out pretty well, I think. Now I've done this side, I will have a big cleanup, vacuum up all the dust. This is why the car's covered in drop cloths at the moment, just to try and keep the dust off everything, because it goes everywhere. But I'll have a good cleanup, and then I will start making the driver's side door, which is essentially a mirror image, but it's longer here. You can see the door actually goes across to there on the driver's side, so you've got more room. I am a bit worried that the hinges I bought aren't long enough. By long enough, I mean sticking out far enough either end, because obviously for two hinges to work, the pins have to be in alignment, and one of them goes sort of right at the bottom down here, and the other one's a bit higher up. So I'm just worried, will I have enough material inside the door to actually screw it to the frame? And what I want to do is, I don't want to screw these in place, I actually want to bolt them through. So on one of the original cars I have pictures of, there's actually a steel bracket that goes in here all along the front, and the hinges are bolted through that as far as I can tell. You don't want to just use screws because they'll work loose. So hopefully these hinges are going to be long enough. Otherwise I might be getting some more. Of course, it depends where you put them as well. So the bottom ones are down low. If you put them up here where there's more curve, if I show that properly, obviously they need to be longer so they can stick out to be vertical. But if I put one of the hinges here and then down there, that would work. The original door here does give me some indication of where the hinges go, but my car is close to that, but it's not exactly the same as that. So it's a little bit different, and I think the original hinges may have been longer. So we'll just have to see. I'm also going to have to, of course, notch the timber where the hinges need to set in, but it's easy enough to do that with a sharp chisel. And I think what I'll have to do is route along the bottom edge and the back edge a little recess, a little lip. So if you imagine, the door will come down and then step in, and that's where the steel plate gets screwed to it. So you have a steel edge along the bottom and the back of the door, because you can see on this original skin along the back edge and the bottom it's folded 90 degrees. So there's a piece of steel that this is folded over, and that's what's holding it to the bottom edge of the door, and this is the lip that overhangs the bottom of the body. At least that seems to be how it goes. So I think that's come out reasonably well. Like I say, time for a big cleanup, and then I will start on the second door. It takes me days to do this because the glue dries pretty quickly, but I think it's better to leave it overnight to really make sure it's dried, especially when you're doing a lot of sort of handling, and you know, I've been turning this upside down and around in every direction to be able to sand it, clamping it in my little wood vise there, clamping it down to the bench with clamps, and it's pretty strong. I don't think it's going to come apart. I am still going to reinforce it where it looks like there was reinforcing on the originals, and I think they'll be fine. This shows why I stop and clean up quite often. This is the filter out of my shop vac. After vacuuming up some of the dust, you can feel the vacuum just stops working because the filter ends up so clogged. So every so often I have to stop and come and clean it out. So that's why I'm outside with a mask. So after an awful lot of work and cutting timber and sanding and gluing bits on where I messed things up, and sanding it again, and then having to stop and completely clean up the shed because it was full of sawdust and sandings, I have a driver's door skin, door frame rather, and it's a little bit smaller than the original door. I knew that had happened. That was a mistake I made at some point when I made the frame. I'm not quite sure where, but it means my doors have ended up being a little bit shorter than they should be, or rather a little bit less tall than they should be, probably about half an inch to an inch, which is a bit, but it still looks okay. But what I was more interested in is, have I got the curvature correct on the frame? And the way to check that is to sit it on the skin, and it's pretty close. Given that this skin has been off its frame, so you need to bend it or just, you know, just clamp it to get it to sit nicely, it's actually pretty close, which is good, which means I've got the shape of the car more or less correct. Like I say, it's not perfect, but I don't have a perfect one to copy off, so I think this will be good enough. I'll put it in the actual door opening and we'll see what they look like. Okay, there's still going to be shaping needed a little bit here and there, I think, and again, it's really hard to get these to fit perfectly, I imagine, so especially if you've never done it before. But looking at pictures of original cars, it's hard to get an idea of how good the finish on these was. A lot of the pictures of cars, because they were raced, particularly at Brooklands, which is where the name comes from, they were pretty beat up in the day. So I think I should be able to get pretty close to what looks like a good finish. It's not going to be perfect. I don't know if it'll be factory, because I don't know what factory was, but it should be good enough for an old car, which is what I'm going for. So that's the door in the opening. I have got pretty generous gaps around it, but I think now you can really see the shape of the car and the sort of barrel shape of it. Does kind of bulge out a bit at the top. They look kind of beetle shaped to me, I realized, and you look at some of the photos from certain angles and they do look very sort of bulbous, a bit puffed out almost, sort of beetly, but that's why they call them barrel bodied, because they do have that sort of barrel shape. I think I've got the cockpit opening is even at least, and I've tried to get the thicknesses of the the rails and things correct. It's going to get a bit interesting around here. There is a sort of combing that goes all the way around, so I'm not sure if I've got that quite right. That'll be interesting to see. I might need to extend it somehow in there, or it'll probably just be a flat piece that goes on there, and that capping goes all the way around, so all the way around the door and all the way around the back of the seat. So I'm not sure how I'm going to make that. I'm suspecting either some sort of hardboard, flexible board, or maybe aluminium, and then that would be covered in foam and vinyl or leather or whatever it is I end up using. I'll get to that when I get to it, I think. I did make sure that the inside of the door frames are shaped as well, so that I will be able to screw a sort of a padded flat panel on there, or an aluminium panel, or whatever it is that goes on the inside. Whatever I decide to do there, I may just leave it open. Doesn't necessarily need anything, but I think that works. I really need to sit in it and see if it's going to get in the way of elbows and things like that. I suspect it will. That's just how they were. Having my doors slightly lower will actually help there. Gives you a bit more arm room, I guess. But I think that's going to work. A very quick thing to finish with. I've put the Riley back under its covers. I think I mentioned previously that I ordered some steel, and that's all been delivered, so that's to make all the rest of the little brackets and bits and pieces I need. I also decided to invest in a handheld metal bandsaw. So obviously I need to cut up this sort of steel, and my bandsaw there is for wood. It's set up with a wood blade. I don't really want to get a different blade for that. You can get bimetallic blades and you can do wood and metal, but I'd rather keep a nice sharp wood blade there. The other reason I decided to buy the bandsaw is because I'm helping a mate of mine out and making a new pulley for him for his fancy mountain bike. The pulleys are plastic and he wanted an aluminium one, so I got some 3-inch diameter aluminium bar stock, but I've been trying to cut through this with a hacksaw by hand, and it's just taking forever. So I thought that was a good excuse to finally get hold of a little metalworking bandsaw. What I'll do is I will build a little table for that, so that when I'm not using it handheld, I can sit it on the bench and use that to cut things like this, bits of strap and other little pieces of metal. Be really handy. But for something completely different, I need to do a little bit of work on the MGB. It's due for a warrant. I think I mentioned the rear springs have got lower and lower over time since I built the car. I believe these springs I had re-arched. They would have been taken apart, re-tempered. Oh, possibly not. My Austin 7 ones definitely were, and the Riley ones were definitely rebuilt by a proper spring maker. These ones may have just been reset but not re-tempered. Anyway, over time I think they've sagged a bit, so I've taken those off. I'm going to see what's available and see if I can get new springs for it. Luckily everything came apart really easily, because when I assembled it, even though it was years ago, I used copper grease on everything. Everything came apart pretty well. This car's been converted to Spax adjustable rear shocks, which seem in good condition still. They need a bit of a clean up. And these springs, it's been so long since I've done any MG stuff. I used to know all of this stuff, because when I was working on it, of course, I had to learn it all, but I've forgotten a lot of it. So these are 6-leaf rear springs. I think GT's use 7. I can't really remember. But if we measure the free height of these, it's going to be a bit tricky. I'm not sure I can with one hand, but what you do is you line up a straight edge between the middle of the spring eye either end, and then you measure the height between your straight edge and the middle of the spring. And when I do that on these, I get 2.5 inches. So I want to raise the rear of the car. I've just noticed a new ding there. That wasn't me, that was probably a car park. There's a few of them down the side of the car. I want to raise the back of the car about 1 inch. So I'll see what springs are available. When I assembled all of this, I used poly bushes on everything. You can sort of see even the spring ones there. They're hard plastic, and they've held up really well. I think I'm just going to put all the shackles and bits and pieces in the ultrasonic cleaner. Whoops, just to clean them up. And I'll ring the local, well, it's not local to me anymore, it's up in Auckland, but the MG parts place, and see what they've got in stock. Milo, stop eating sawdust. Silly dog.